302 points, 9 podiums, a sprint victory, and a record-breaking 1.8-second pit stop. I mean, no matter how you describe McLaren's 2023 season, it's been a real rollercoaster for them and their fans as they fought their way up the World Championship table to finish in P4. And it's a solid result, right? I mean, beating Aston Martin to be the best of the customer teams despite that slow start to the year. Powerful upgrades in Austria and Singapore meant that by the end of the year, the MCL60 was one of the fastest cars on the F1 grid. And you couple that then with contract extensions for their massively strong driver pairing, as well as a car that's livery is filled with sponsors from deep-pocketed companies around the world. Objectively, you have to say that McLaren are in a good spot at the moment. But this is a team that prior to the hybrid era was one of F1's most reliable and famous championship challengers, not just a master of the midfield. So is the sky really the limit for McLaren? Can they take on the factories of Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, or will they find diminishing marginal returns for their improvements as they get closer to the top of Formula 1? Well, let's say that you're taking the position that McLaren will be stuck in that midfield for a while and they won't be able to break that hierarchy and get to the top of the World Championship. What arguments have you got in your favour? Well, one that stands out to me is something that we see across all sports, and it has to do with recruitment and keeping your employees, because if you're not a team that's bringing home wins, no matter what sport you're in, you're not winning Super Bowls, you're not winning Premier Leagues, it becomes very, very hard to keep your top talent when that talent is thinking they're worthy of those wins, right? Imagine if you're a mid-level Premier League club and you find a young star who's come up through your academy. Once he gets good enough, he's going to want to go to City or United or get that big money contract, and he's going to leave the club that, yes, raised him, yes, he's somewhat loyal to, but he's got to chase that win. And you see it in Formula 1 too. It's what people have been talking about with Lando all year. But one of the factors that's been able to cancel that out for McLaren is this incredible loyalty that they have, not only with Norris, but with the whole company. Getting these employees to kind of buy into your plan of development makes those wins so much sweeter when the employees are going to stay for a long time. You're going to have that lower turnover rate than potentially some of the other teams who are less good at fostering that kind of environment. So the two things that can cancel out that effect of your best talent going to more successful teams when they get good enough are money and loyalty, and that's what McLaren have been able to find. I mean, we just saw they've announced this new contract with Mercedes to keep the Mercedes powertrain up till 2030, and they've just finished building their new wind tunnel too. So they're putting in all the right steps to kind of cross that barrier, jump up to the factory teams, and the division is less clear than we see maybe in MotoGP, but there is still a division in Formula 1 between the customer teams and the factory teams. And before, when McLaren were winning championships, yes, it was with a Mercedes engine, but that was before the Mercedes Formula 1 team entered Formula 1. And one of the points that was actually brought up in the Brawn documentary is when you're a customer team, you get closer and closer and closer to the team that you're buying your engine from. What you might start to find is that that engine is not as good as it used to be, because that top team is going to want all your data, right? They're going to want to beat all their customers. It was one of the really, really embarrassing things that people were saying about Alonso and Aston Martin compared to Mercedes at the start of the year, that Alonso came out of the gate so quickly, smashing the Mercedes factory team with their own equipment. They've been able to put together the same bits that Mercedes have in their car more efficiently, right? And then as the year went on, Mercedes were able to claw back that gap and eventually finish P2 in the championship, though it went down right until that last race and really hinged on that Perez penalty. And to be fair to McLaren, by the end of the year, they were also taking that Mercedes engine, beating Aston Martin, and taking the fight to the factory team at the same time. So to some extent then in Formula 1, that barrier between the customer and the factory teams is not as solid as maybe it is in MotoGP, and McLaren have been able to do some great work to overcome that. But of course, in the hybrid era, no Mercedes engines team has been able to beat the factory Mercedes outfit. And as I was talking about the recruitment earlier, yes, McLaren have been really, really successful, both with their new team principal and with the rookie driver Oscar Piastri. That recruitment has been really, really key. But once the designers start doing really, really well and they start to unlock the secrets of these technical regulations, Mercedes, who are still struggling with that, surely just look at the McLaren designer LinkedIn page and think, well, maybe we'll send him a request. Maybe he could bring that secret over to us and help our design team. So what's key for McLaren then is to make efficient choices. Whenever opportunity cost is on the table, you have to pick the right thing. You have to recruit the right driver, right? To get Oscar Piastri within the seat, to poach him from Alpine was a really key decision. To sign that new powertrain contract with Mercedes, to get the investment to build their new wind tunnel. All these steps are moving in the right direction. And actually, when you look at the current world champions, Red Bull, to go from a new team on the grid right at the back in 2005 to race wins in 2009, championships in the V8 era, back down a little bit, and then of course back up to the most dominant season ever that we saw this season, Red Bull have risen that arc and did it effectively until recently as a customer team. So the precedent is kind of there, but maybe the structure is a little bit different in Formula 1 now, where the teams that have risen to the top have kind of etched in their hierarchy and performance. So for McLaren, not only do they have to get up to that level, but they've then got to beat Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes if they're going to challenge for a title. And to me, that might be that final barrier that will keep them in P4 rather than P1, 2 or 3. What you have to say though, irrespective of anything else, is that purely on merit, their driver pairing is one of the best on the Formula 1 grid. I mean, Leclerc and Sainz are probably the two closest of anyone. Of course, Lando, Norris and Oscar Piastri have a basic 2-to-1 split in their points contributions over the year, but what we saw for Oscar was that development, that tyre management, that race management, being able to make a one-stopper work when other people couldn't, right? Something that Alex Albon is super talented at. Oscar was able to kind of develop those skills. I mean, maybe of course not up to Lando's level by the end of the year. Lando's still going to be heading into that team thinking he's the team leader in 2024, but Oscar did show that development, showed it more than Sargent, and was able to get up to the level of being a solid Formula 1 driver rather than just a rookie. And speaking of Sargent and Albon at Williams, I think they're an interesting kind of foil for McLaren and their dynamics, right? Williams and McLaren are both teams that have had massive championship success in the past. They've both got new team principals, a new rookie driver, and the Mercedes engine. And of course, Aston Martin are really the true challenger to McLaren when you look at those Mercedes customer teams. But Williams are on that same arc at the moment, right? Their new team principal, James Vowles, came from Mercedes, actually went from a top team to a more powerful role in a lower down team. So there's a kind of reversal to that recruitment that's also quite interesting. Maybe McLaren will be trying to poach some more Red Bull designers to keep their uptick going. I mean, we know that they've got Rob Marshall coming in, right? He's going to be a really key role doing exactly that at McLaren, right? Bringing that Red Bull knowledge, that Red Bull work ethic down to McLaren. So maybe he's another factor that can bring them up. When James Vowles was brought into Williams, he gave some really enlightening details on just how far the gap is between the customer and the World Championship teams. I mean, one of the biggest things he talks about was a piece of software that allowed the designers to track where different components were in their development arc, right? Are they in design, in composition, in QC, or are they being shipped out to the car? Little bits of software like that are so natural, so obvious for the main teams is one of the key barriers that people don't see that keeps the customer teams where they are, right? They're not able to get the funding, so they're not able to get the infrastructure, so they're not able to get the performance, so they're not able to get the funding, and that cycle keeps playing out. And what McLaren have been able to do, what Williams are trying to do, is to break that cycle, to put in those concrete steps. But also, it's a little bit zero-sum in Formula 1, right? Despite the threat of Andretti, effectively, if you're going to take someone's positions, you have to outperform them, right? You can't just be good while everyone else is good. You have to be better. And that's what I was saying earlier too. Most of the current leadership at McLaren has never fought for a world championship with the McLaren team. And despite how many times you say it in interviews, it's going to be very difficult to be successful at that in their first time. I mean, we saw how sharp Red Bull got in 2021, and what they've brought into 2022 and 3 is a real level of efficiency, of attention to detail in every instance, right? I mean, we saw Max this year finish every single lap of every single race. The third time I think that's ever been done in F1 history. The last people to do it in the modern era was Lewis in 2019 with Mercedes too. So alongside the recruitment, alongside getting the drivers and the cash all in the right places, that reliability is another key factor that all the championship challengers, at least when they're successful, right, have been able to put together. And that's something that McLaren haven't really been tested on yet. Yes, they were fighting Aston Martin, but when you turn the heat up, reliability extends not only to your car, but to your drivers, right? Are they going to shunt it in the wall when the pressure's on, like Russell did in Singapore, or like Lando did in Vegas, or even something that Oscar Piastri's been criticised by Brundle before, getting in too many little skirmishes, taking points off of the World Championship because of your ego, because of not being able to pick your battles correctly. Something like that is a level of maturity that we only see with more educated drivers. I mean, someone like Fernando is the perfect example of that. He's able to maximise points in every instance, and sharpening up that driver pairing for McLaren is another key developmental step in their growth that I think we'll see tested next year. And on the technical side too, yes, by the end of the year, the MCL60 was able to be one of the fastest cars in Formula 1, but it was the same old story in the post-race interviews where the drivers were saying, even when the car is fast, we don't have that feel, that pure intuition, the System 1 thinking, the flow state in Q3, whatever you want to call it. Lando and Oscar were saying that yes, we both agree that the car is fast in the right conditions when we get it set up correctly, when the track is set up correctly for the car, when the dynamics of the track fit the strengths of the car. But getting it to that point is really difficult, and that's something that for Max is so easy in that Red Bull, because he's been able to be so involved in the development. It's been able to be so tailored to his driving style, like we spoke about last week, right? That kind of sensitivity analogy that Alex Albon explained. They've been able to get that feel within the pace of the car down to a T in the Red Bull team. And what they haven't been able to do at McLaren is be able to kind of synthesize those two things. If they go too much towards feel, they lose pace. If they go too much towards pace, they lose that feel. So as we head into the off-season between 2022 and 2023, it's a good time to take stock of where we are in Formula 1, right? It's season review season as everyone looks back and says, oh, I got prediction for Charles Leclerc to win the World Championship wrong, or whatever anyone was saying at the start of the year. It's been really great to look back on how it is developed, right? Before testing, everyone was thinking maybe Aston Martin might be the ones to pick. We saw Fernando Alonso come out flying and the McLarens come out stumbling back in Bahrain. And that arc, that law of large numbers plays out throughout the entire year, and those upgrades are able to start coming in. So for McLaren, I think they'll be taking stock of a pretty positive year, right? New team principal, new rookie driver. They've been able to get some real championship success. I'm sure Lando, even though he did get 205 points throughout the year, will be looking back at Oscar Piastri's sprint win and thinking, oh my god, even my teammate beat me to a win in his first year in Formula 1 compared to my fifth. I feel like next spring, in those first few episodes of Drive to Survive, we'll get some really dramatic moments inside that McLaren garage as they're so initially humbled by their weak performance as they rise through the ranks throughout the year. Those upgrades, that satisfaction, that reward of the emotions when you really buy in. You know, the rain makes way for the sunshine, however you want to say it. They've gone through that roller coaster and they've earned the results they've got off the back of their successful development. And while we're talking teams, I mean, there's always that wild card potentially of Andretti joining as an 11th team, and you can imagine from McLaren's position when they're working so hard to fight their way up the World Championship, what they want least is another new factory entry to Formula 1. They're having a hard enough time beating the ones that are already in. You can imagine why they want to keep the door to the party closed with regards to Andretti and Cadillac. So after all that rambling, I should probably make a conclusion, and what I'll conclude on is the thought that while McLaren have been really successful, I don't think they'll be able to break through that barrier because of the problems that I've talked about. I mean, they've been able to beat Alpine, right, who are the kind of bogey factory, the worst factory team in Formula 1, getting beaten by two Mercedes customers. That's really great for McLaren, but I don't think Lando will finish his career with McLaren. At some point, that dream of race wins, of championship wins, will just start to be even more in the distance the longer he stays at McLaren. Then in turn, his agent, his backers are going to start to think, well, then maybe let's make that jump forward to a Red Bull, to a Mercedes, or even to a Ferrari, right? But at the same time, in last week's video, I predicted that Ferrari would take the victory in their fight with Mercedes for P2, so what do I know? More importantly, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Do you think McLaren will be able to break the hierarchy in Formula 1 and make their way up to the top of the World Championship once again, or will they be forever stuck as midfield maestros? And where do you think Lando Norris will be looking to take his career if he doesn't stay with the Papaya outfit? As always, thank you very much for watching. Make sure you check out Crash.net for coverage of all racing series around the motorsport world, and check back in with us at Crash F1 throughout the off-season for all the storylines and talking points as we head into another year of Formula 1 in 2024.